let's multiply some integers. Again, I want to remind you an integer is a whole number, not a fraction or a decimal or anything, that is either positive or negative. That, of course, includes 0, which we'll talk about here in a minute. There's a few different ways that we write multiplying. The kid way of doing it is the traditional 3 with the little x and then the 5. And so 3 times 5, we try to avoid this when we start getting into algebra because we use the letter x sometimes. So a better way to write it for algebra is going to be 3 and then a dot. 3 times 5. So this is a common way. Another way is we use parentheses. So when you see a number right next to a set of parentheses, that means multiply. We could even put parentheses around both numbers. And it all means the exact same thing. So you'll see all of these notations. Either way, all of them are going to give you 15. So I'd like to make a special note. The result of multiplying numbers together is called the product. Product. So if you hear your teacher say that word, they mean that they've multiplied a couple of things together. All right, I'd like to start out with a couple of the rules. There are 4 very basic rules when it comes to multiplying integers. First rule is when we have a positive value times another positive value, the result is going to give me a positive value. Next rule, a negative value times a positive value, when the signs are different like that, we get a negative value. This next rule, rule number 3, is kind of the same. So I'm going to have a positive here times a negative. And again, that's going to give me a negative result. So notice rules 2 and 3 have opposite signs. One's positive, one's negative. That result is going to be negative. Rule number 4 is what if we multiply 2 negative values together? That's going to give me a positive value. There are various reasons for that. Notice rule number 1 and rule number 4 have the same result. So when the sign is the same with 2 numbers, any 2 numbers actually, the result will always be positive. Let's do some examples. So we're going to stick with some easy numbers. And the first example is going to be 7 times 9. And notice I'm using the dot notation in this case. I'm going to mostly use that, but sometimes I'll use the parentheses. I know you know 7 times 9, hopefully you know that, is 63, but more importantly, I want you to notice that I have a positive times another positive, and the result is, again, a positive value. Let's try the next rule, and I'm going to have a negative 2 times 8. Notice the signs are different. Negative 2, positive 8 is going to give me a negative value, so without doing any thinking, right away I can put down the negative, and I know that 2 times 8 is 16. So the result is negative 16, or the product is negative 16. Next example. I'm going to do a positive 3 times a negative 7. Now I put the dot here, but I didn't need to put the dot. If the dot was not there, it would still be 3 times negative 7. Either way, I have a positive times a negative. The result is going to give me a negative regardless. And in this case, of course, it's 21. Next up. Negative 10 times negative 1. Notice I didn't put the dot in this case. That's fine. That still means multiply. Negative 10 times negative 1. Negative times a negative is going to give me a positive value of 10. So there are those 4 rules. Let's try one with order of operations. So I'm going to go negative 3, parenthesis, 4 times negative 5. Order of operations says I need to do what's inside the parentheses first. So this is going to equal negative 3, parenthesis. Now 4 times negative 5 is going to give me a negative 20 because I have a positive 4 times a negative 5. Looking at the rules, that would be rule number 3. Gives me the negative 20. Notice I wrote the negative 3 with it. You want to rewrite the entire problem each time. Don't just write part of it down. Next up, I have negative 3 times negative 20. A negative times a negative is going to give me a positive 60 in this case. And there you have it. Next up, there's a couple of special rules that we have. And this first rule involves the number 0. it's going to be a times 0, meaning any number times 0 is always going to give me the result is always going to be 0. So let's do a quick example. We'll do 2 examples. So let's do 0 times 5. That, of course, is going to be 0. And we'll have a little fun here. Let's do a smiley face times 0. Of course, is going to be 0. One more rule. Any number times 1 is going to give me that same number back. So a times 1 equals a. Again, the a represents any number. My example, I'm going to go 1 times 6. Notice the order doesn't matter. It's still going to give me 6. And of course, smiley face times 1 is going to give me smiley face. And that is how you multiply a couple of numbers. All right, let's multiply some integers. Again, I want to remind you an integer is a whole number, not a